it's one thing every Jamaican loves other than a big body girl, it's money. We would do anything if it meant getting rich. However, some of these methods work better than others. This is because of a little thing called the time to money ratio. The faster you get money and the more money you get in that time is also going to be the more risk you take. And whether or not that risk is worth it is very important. It can fall between you risking just a few hours of your time or your very freedom. And for some people, even their dignity. We're going to go over every way a Jamaican can mish out in this economy and evaluate whether the risks are worth it or not. First off, to start off the legal methods, we have the good old-fashioned 9 to 5. You can go to school, get an education, and come out working a decent job. Now listen, getting a 9 to 5 is not nearly as bad as people make it seem, and depending on the area that you take, it can actually make you a decent amount of money. And it's the first thing on the list because the risk meter is virtually zero. The only real risk is that you never actually end up becoming rich, spending 25 years of your life kissing up to others and working toward promotions that never come. You have no feasible way to scale your pay based on how much work you're putting in, and the cost of living ain't a bumbleclot. And if you pair that with the fact that you can technically lose your job at any time based on someone else's opinion, I don't know, that sounds pretty risky to me. But provided you're actually a hard worker and you know how to whisper in the right ears cause a links around the world, it should be possible to get rich from a 9 to 5, give or take in 20 to 30 years of your hard work and time. And keep in mind that's if you're even in a field that allows you to go that far and make that much money. However, if you want to speed up that process, you can go to the next method on the list, which is financial literacy. Financial literacy is simply the knowledge that should be taught to every teenager in high school, but for whatever reason, we learn all sorts of other useless bullshit instead. For example, the average Jamaican has no idea what an index fund is or how stocks, bonds, loan payments, or even how taxes work. But have no fear, that's what this video is for. An index fund is a type of stock investment that essentially allows you a small but guaranteed return, simply because they're investing in so many different stocks at once that even if some of them fail, some of them are at least guaranteed to succeed. The normal payout rates for anyone who opens an index fund at one of these companies is about 10% per year. Of course, this is less profitable than dumping all of your money into one stock and hoping it goes to the moon, but if that stock fails, then you get knocked with no boots or birth control, which is where the guaranteed safety of the index fund comes in. A popular example of where you can do this in Jamaica is a company called Barita. Of course, this is just one method in the financial literacy category. Many people have used methods like this, stocks, taking out loans to buy real estate, and all types of other methods to speed up their path to riches from simply just their 9 to 5. And if you do these things well, you may actually have a shot at being rich in the next 15 or so years with discipline, and maybe 25 years with no discipline. Better than the 9 to 5 method, which will most likely leave you broke, but still room for improvement. But that's why the next item on this list is trading. Trading is essentially the buying and selling of online assets to try and make a profit. Things like stocks, crypto, forex, or foreign exchange are examples. For example, if somebody wanted to make money from foreign exchange, they would take their Jamaican dollars, watch the charts and see where the US dollar dips to its cheapest point, buy US dollars, wait until it rises up again, and then sell it back. And basically doing this on a larger scale so they actually make some money. This is where you'll notice a drastic cut down on the time frame to get rich. An average trader can genuinely go from nothing to rich in a time frame of just a few years. But the key word is can, meaning it's technically humanly possible. The reason why the time frame is cut down is because, like I said at the start of the video, it's an increase in a shit ton of risk. I have seen people lose $1 million of JMD just learning to trade before they ever made back a single profit, and then they eventually got good at it and started making that money back. However, the point is, as much as trading can make you money, it can also lose you that money at double that speed, which is why trading is not a get rich quick scheme, nor is it an easy way to cheat the system. It's a skill, just like anything else, and if you're good at it, you'll make money. But quite frankly, if you know say you broke and nah money for start off, I would genuinely recommend a money making method that won't destroy your account. Hence why the next method on the list is entrepreneurship. Congratulations, we have officially made it to our first area with a medium tier risk and decent rewards. Of course, this depends on what kind of entrepreneur you want to be and that also determines the potential success of your business. For example, if you want to sell products, you're going to require startup capital that's most likely gonna come out of your own pocket. However, if it's a service you're providing, the only thing you're exchanging is time, and quite frankly, because it's your business, you get to choose how much risk you want to take for how much reward you're willing to go after. With a good brain on your shoulders, entrepreneurship is almost purely a game of skill, while also having a good eye to turn luck into results. And if you can master this, your time frame for getting rich can go from anywhere between 1 to 5 years. However, rich is a strong word because not all businesses are that scalable. Even when some businesses do become successful, because of the fact that it was never intended to service more than a specific amount of people, that's pretty much as far as its potential can go. Like a restaurant, you can only have so many customers in a day, unless you plan to open an entirely new branch which would open a whole new world of risks and consequences. For the extreme cost of doing that, you literally just have to accept the fact that that's as many customers as your business can physically handle. But have no fear, if we're talking about scalability, the next one on the list will fix all of your problems, and that is online business. Now hear me out, there is a lot of stigma around online business, but that's exactly because of the high risk that makes you able to succeed. It's pretty difficult to get an online business started out. However, funnily enough, despite popular opinion, I actually believe online businesses are some of the lowest risk ventures you could possibly take on. Why? Because even though it's high risk that it will actually work out, the thing is it doesn't cost any money to start, or at least it doesn't have to. For example, if it was a real life business and you want to sell shoes, you'd have to buy a whole load of shoes and hope to God that people buy it so that you don't end up wasting your money. However, if it's an online business, you can make a page for that shoes business and test out how many people are actually interested in shoes, and once you see that there's an actual demand, then you can go and buy the shoes and then ship it to the people. The only real cost of online businesses is advertising, and even then it's not gonna cost much if you simply make a TikTok page and learn to make actual content that does well on its own. Business pages do not need a lot of followers to sell products. Even just a couple of hundred views or followers should be enough to get some people to want to buy your stuff. And the best part is it's infinitely scalable because your pages can grow between 100 followers and even 1,000,000. Genuinely, when this actually works out, the time frame of getting rich from what I've seen can literally be anywhere from 6 months to 3 years of hard work and effort. But trust me, it is so worth it. So worth it that I debated putting it above the next item on the list. However, the next tier still wins in terms of rich potential, and that is taking those same social media skills and becoming a content creator. Now again, yes, this is inherently high risk because there are many people who try to create content and don't go anywhere. However, that risk comes at absolutely no cost to you or your well-being, and anybody can learn to create good content for absolutely free. Therefore, the only thing you risk losing is your time and perhaps your dignity if you really want to go down some weird routes. There are many kind of content creators you can be. In fact, if you live in America or have a friend overseas, you can literally make money from TikTok views. There are so many opportunities to make money on social media, from sponsorships to ad revenue. And yes, not everyone is just gonna blow up overnight, but there's literally no risk because the only time social media becomes risky is if you're dumb enough to quit your job before you actually start making money. If it starts off as just a hobby for your free time, don't be surprised if you end up seeing it as a viable option to build your empire. And the best part is, it's infinitely scalable. I would know. This channel blew up on its very first video. Because of the crazy power of algorithms these days, the estimated potential from nothing to a lot of money can go from just a couple of weeks to about 4 years. Most big creators didn't even take 4 years to reach where they are, but it's possible, which would make this the quickest path to success thus far on this list. However, let's also be realistic here. This is not easy. Content creation is a skill, and as much as this channel blew up on its very first video, the only reason why is because I know how to blow up channels since I've been doing this for years. You're not going to learn to edit like me or create professional thumbnails in just a couple of days. It's just not possible. Therefore, because everything is a skill, it's probably gonna take a few months to actually get good, which is why the next item on this list is single-handedly the fastest and most insane legal way to go from broke to rich, literally overnight. I cannot think of anything legal with this much potential except gambling, and that is none other than crypto. Now listen, I have never been that much into crypto for the reasons you're about to hear, but I'd be lying if I said I'd never heard the stories of guys who invested everything into a coin, the coin went up and they became millionaires the very next day. For example, a type of cryptocurrency called Dogecoin was started purely as a joke. A few people invested some money into it, but then, because of some tweets from Elon Musk about the coin and social media making so many memes, the coin's popularity skyrocketed skyrocketed. And in an extremely short period, the small amounts of money people invested initially literally grew into millions. Another example is when Trump launched his cryptocurrency right before his election, and quite literally over 500 people became millionaires in less than 24 hours. I'm not joking, bro. But of course, if you've learned anything from this video so far, you'd know that this insane reward could not exist without an unfathomable amount of risk. Methods of getting rich this fast are usually not legal, but crypto, being completely unregulated, surprisingly falls within a legal gray area where there are pretty much no laws. However, the risk does not lie in breaking the law. It lies in the fact that you can literally lose everything just as fast as you gained it. For example, one of the guys who invested in Dogecoin, he invested over $180,000 US. When the coin grew, he became a millionaire. However, eventually the coin started to crash, and instead of changing his money back to USD, he kept his money in the coin, and so it went down until it was practically worthless. Some could say that this is his own fault for believing too much in the coin. However, how are you gonna tell him that when it literally made him a millionaire for believing? In his brain, if he just waited out the crash, it would have probably gone up and tripled in value. Or sometimes these currencies can lose value so fast before you're even aware that you need to sell it, which is why this market is extremely volatile. You invested everything, but congratulations, you are now as broke as the day you started, which is why regardless of how much money it makes, I genuinely wouldn't recommend taking it seriously unless you already have a stable source of income and have extra money to play around with. And speaking of making money fast, there is nothing faster at making you money than breaking the law at other people's expense. Welcome to the illegal section of the video. For this section, the risk is almost always going to be a criminal offense, so of course we're going to be explaining the potential rewards of each crime as well as if it's really worth it. First of all, the least illegal way to make some money is by selling that Zaza. Now I know what some of you are thinking, that good stuff is not illegal, and sure, that might be the case, but independent parties are not allowed to just be walking around selling it unregistered. And everybody knows that if you have a plug, it's generally way cheaper than going to some overpriced dispensary, and that's what I call an opportunity. As a plug, you can make literally thousands of dollars, especially if you're the only one in your general area. And the best part is, since the police them about it too, nobody naga informed. However, if in fact you did come across that one waste man, that would come with the legal risk of a fine of up to $200 per ounce, with the maximum amount you can be charged being $500,000, and also up to 3 years in prison. Of course, these are just for some of the worst cases that have been happening before, so generally if you are caught, it probably won't be that bad, but you will in fact get a criminal record. Not the best thing for hoping to get a job in the future. Next on the list, we have pickpocketing. Now that might sound kinda crazy and broke, however, if you really think about it, if you spend a few hours on the streets each day, and in that time you can get a hold of one iPhone, you basically just made yourself at least 50k depending on the condition, sometimes even over 100k. Of course, it's probably not always going to go that smoothly, but once you get good at it, you should be able to make some decent money. Of course, that comes with a risk of anywhere from 3 months to 10 years in prison under the Larceny of a Person Act, depending on the value of what you stole. And there's also the potential of someone realizing you're stealing from them and killing you on the spot, but think about the GLE, it's all worth it. And speaking of killing, the next item on the list is some good old-fashioned robbery. Not that sneaky shit pickpockets do, but I mean going up to a nigga, brawling, and saying, yo, pussy, give me everything in your bumbo-clad pocket. No. While pickpocketing may have its good days and bad days, I can tell you that robbery will get you those phones and wallets with a much higher success rate. Of course, many Jamaicans aren't just gonna sit down and let you rob them, but that's what you have your trusty friend for. So you might end up escalating your charges to murder. But there are sacrifices that come with every struggle. But there's a reason robbing and pickpocketing are at the bottom of the list. They're extremely high risk and don't make that much money, which is why the criminals doing this really need to re-evaluate what they're risking their freedom for. As Roger Wild said, $50 can't send him go hell. What will get you a good amount of money though is some good old-fashioned money laundering. For those of you who don't know what that is, basically anyone who makes an extremely large sum of money illegally is virtually incapable of using that money in a normal manner to make large purchases. Imagine you want to buy a mansion and you show up with 3 big bags full of cash. That's not gonna make a lot of sense. With that said, if you want this money to actually be usable in the real world and be able to have whole bank accounts and everything, that's where money laundering comes in. Money laundering is essentially the taking of illegal money and investing it into a legitimate business venture so that when the business eventually eventually makes a return on that investment, the money comes out as clean profits. For example, if I made $3 million from scamming and I use that money to start selling shoes, now when the government looks at my bank account, they'll see that all my money is coming from my shoe business, when in reality, they don't know that I'm using my scamming money to source the shoes and advertisements in the first place. The thing is though, this is a lot of work and everybody just want them markets and big house now. So people either A, skip this step entirely and get caught, or B, turn to someone else to do it. And that's where you come in. If you can provide a service that helps people do this, you can take a percentage, and trust me when I say I have seen some crazy money come out of this. Allegedly. Now, of course, if you're caught, the penalty is 10 years in prison with fines of multiple millions of dollars under the Proceeds of Crime Act, otherwise known as POCA. But perhaps maybe you'll be able to hide some of the money so that when you at least get out, you won't be completely broke. But what do I know? I'm just a civilian. But of course, the only thing more profitable than helping a chopper clean his money is being a chopper yourself. Which brings us to the second highest tier on this list: chopping. The Crown, the Beamer, and the Mark X, which to be honest are really just low tier cars considering just how much money these guys are actually making. I have seen cases where young men are literally pulling in millions of dollars per week, and the only reason they ever end up broke again is due to their own stupidity. The most popular methods of scamming in Jamaica are gift cards, hacking, and of course dialing, otherwise known as banging the line, with the last one being the mainly popularized moneymaker for the past few years. This method typically involves telling an overseas client, otherwise known as a skull, presumably because them have no brain, that they have won some kind of lottery for tens of millions of dollars. But in order to receive the prize, they just need to send a small fee of just $20,000 to confirm that this is the right person. Of course, believing that they will be rich if they just send the funds, they do it. And that's when the scammer cuts all ties and pops out next week with a new GLE and all of the local mucks on his hood. Now this may sound like by far the best item on this list. However, let's be clear, chopping is now a very saturated market. And to be honest, MOCA, otherwise known as the Major Organized Crime and Anti-Corruption Agency, has gotten so tired of guys like Skipper and 85% of Montego Bay laughing in their faces that anybody that they catch is 100% getting an example made out of them. So even though research says that the risk is 20 years in prison, I am pretty sure that they will do everything in their power to extend that time, with also them taking every cent you have and giving it back to your victims. On top of this, occasionally you will also find yourself calling number after number with a zero success, which means that sometimes for weeks, even months at a time, you will go with no income. It is a very unpredictable, high risk, high reward job, and if you get caught, not only will they take every cent you have, but you will spend effectively the rest of your life behind bars with a bag of man and no girl. Which is why it's so crazy to me that the last method on this list can actually make you even more money than chopping at a more predictable rate, and if you get caught, you will only go to jail for a fraction of the time. But you might be wondering, what could possibly be such an option? Well, I'll put it like this: no matter how much markets or crown your dog from Moby drop, nor how much dopey him summon, no Jamaican scammer in this economy has ever chopped as much as Gene Panton. And that's why number one on this list is good old-fashioned embezzlement. Embezzlement can be defined as the misappropriation of funds in one's trust by an employer, basically meaning that you're in charge of managing a large sum of money, but you sneak off with a little portion for yourself. I mean, who's gonna notice that a little 2 million is gone when you're watching over 800 mil? It's exactly this kind of system that allowed Gene Panton, employee of Stocks and Securities Limited, to chop over $2 billion before she was eventually caught. And of course, she was only caught because of her own stupidity. $2 billion is enough to put you on a Forbes list. So if you genuinely thought you'd become one of the richest people in the world and nobody would notice the money was missing, you have got to be another level of delusional. But make no mistake, there are thousands, probably millions of people who have embezzled reasonable amounts of money, probably just a few mil over time, and did it in such a smooth way that it never raised any questions. I would rather take 5 years with a guaranteed 10 mil than to try to become Elon Musk overnight and end up in a cell. Another known example of this is former Minister of Education Ruel Reid, who quote-unquote allegedly, don't sue me, chopped over 50 million JMD from the Ministry of Education. And although he and his wife were charged in 2019, because it could never officially be proven, instead of going to jail, he continues to walk free to this day. And on top of this, was given an extra $23 million legally as a settlement package to get him to agree to step down as principal of Jamaica College. So this man, allegedly, made over $75 million off this method, and get this, despite making far more than your average chopper with a completely predictable income, the penalty for embezzlement quite literally only ranges from about 7 to 10 years in prison, which is a joke compared to what Skipper would do if he were caught. Hell, people are already suspecting Jamaican politicians of doing this as we speak, but perhaps that's a topic for another video. Of course, nothing in this video is financial advice, and this is purely for your own education. Please remember, say no girl na day in a prison, and if you don't like fish, I would highly advise against sending yourself there. And speaking of going to prison, if you want to learn the truth about why Vybz Kartel ended up in prison in the first place, click the video on your screen right now. And as always, the dancehall has been decoded.